So I couldn't.
Your voice is not clear, ma'am.
Do you want me to start now?
Few minutes and waiting for people to join, and then we will start.
Perfect. And do you want to say a few words before?
Sorry, I couldn't get you.
Do you want to say a few words before? So you let me.
Yeah. I'll give a short introduction.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. Okay, I think we will be starting with the session now. So, hi everyone, this is Manish Nath from Hex-Star Universe, and I am going to be your host for today's session. First of all, thank you everyone for taking the time to join us today. Today is the third day of our celebration of the World Space Week, and in today's live session, we'll be going to discuss about space colonization. And today, to enlighten us on this topic, we have none other than Ms. Eleonore Poli with us. She is a PhD student at the University of Cambridge, an Analogue scientist, Vice-Curator of GS Cambridge, also the founder of CHASM and Climate Club Project, and also, last but not the least, a career astronaut candidate. We are really glad to have her here with us today. So without any further ado, I'd like to request Ms. Eleonore Poli to proceed with today's session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Manish. It's really nice to be here with you. I hope you had nice sessions so far and that you're having a great space week. I'll be sharing my screen right now, so give me a few seconds for this. So you can see all your faces, fantastic, and we can get started. Yeah, so as Manish said, I'm a materials scientist mainly, but I'm also very, very keen about space, but also very, very keen about sustainability. And a few years back, if you had asked me, like, would you want to go to Mars or not, I probably would have said no, for multiple reasons I'll go over during our talk today. But for the moment, I just want to remind you, what is the current state of space? So if you look back so far in the 50s and the 60s, obviously we sent the first man to space, the first woman to space, first EVAs, we went on the moon, we've done docking, we've sent some probes actually already a long time ago to Moon, to Mars, to Venus. Mercury, we never really managed to get data from the surface itself. We only had probes going around it because obviously it's a very harsh environment. And obviously we had other probes going, for example, near Saturn with the Cassandra mission, the Voyager missions, where we actually are getting outside of the solar system. But the one big thing that we're missing is actually putting a human being on another planetary body. We don't even have a woman yet on the moon, even less on Mars, right? So at the moment, we're very much missing that little bit of space exploration. We haven't put a human being on the moon since the 70s. Why? Well, because we didn't really need it, and also because of financial reasons. At some point, there was this massive space race, this kind of competition between the Soviet Union and the US that really triggered, technological advancement and research for space. But once we've been on the moon, I mean, you can do as many tests as you want. At some point, it has to be financially viable. And at that point, it just didn't become so much so. What happened is then they started doing more like tests and space stations. So we had the Mir space station, and then, you had Skylab, and then now you have the International Space Station, which is currently being decommissioned for the next coming years. What's been developing right now in the last 10 years is commercial space, right? So the problem with agencies like NASA and ESA is that a lot of the money comes actually from the taxpayers. So if the taxpayers, like they did in the 70s during the Apollo program, don't really enjoy space or don't really see the use of it, then that can actually reduce massively the amount of money actually available for it, right? So commercial spaceflight allows you to do different things because the money doesn't depend on, the whole country's approbation. It depends on a few, usually millionaires or billionaires. So not always really great. It doesn't always give you access to a space for all, but it does trigger development a bit further. So right now, what's actually happening? Well, return to the moon, want to put the first woman on the moon, and we want to go to Mars. And one of the ways to also do that is to actually go to the moon on a more permanent manner. So you want to put some settlements, you want to put some habitats. We want to, experience a bit further than just going there, hitting a few golf balls and then coming back. So the question is, why think of colonization? Well, there's always the thing that, moon is just a short trip, and Mars is not really a short trip. On the moon, you can just be a couple of days away and then be back. With Mars, the problem is the duration of the journey is so long. It's like several months. So it can be up to 9 months, depending what you're shooting for. Normally, you're going to try to aim for 6 months. But basically, it's a very, very long trip. And then once you're there, you actually have to stay a few months there before you're actually in a position where it makes sense to be then launched for Earth. If you don't wait a few months, you're not going to be able to go back to Earth. So your journey is completely different than just, going 3 hours into space or even going to International Space Station. International Space Station, you can do it within a day, no problem. So it doesn't have already the same optic as just space flight to go to space, right? If you're going to go to Mars, you have to think about the practicality of it, about how much money you actually invest. And one way to make those trips worth it is actually to just have a settlement over there. Another big thing is just human beings in general. We've always enjoyed looking further. We've always enjoyed exploring. We always enjoyed seeing more. And it might make sense just from a human evolution standpoint that we become a multiplanetary species, that we don't just have the Earth, that we actually also go to Mars and maybe later on exoplanets. Obviously, right now, our technology would never allow us to go to exoplanets. We're already going to have to see if we can make it to Mars. Not tomorrow for sure. But yeah, basically, this is possibly part of our DNA, part of just being a human being, is that you actually want to explore further. And that would mean that you make massive technological advancements. Now, how do you actually colonize? So you have to prepare for it. You have to prepare yourself, but you also have to prepare the planet. And then you have to build habitats, possibly terraform, and develop a civilization. Because colonize is not just, you come on the moon and you have your rovers and then you leave them and then you go. No, colonizing is really about actually settling somewhere. It's actually living. It's not surviving. It's not you just always being in a spacesuit to go outside and always having to calculate how much you eat or drink, right? On the long run, you want people to live, not just to survive. And part of that preparation is actually making sure that you're not disturbing anyone. By this, I mean that for the moment, we haven't actually found any life on Mars or any other planetary bodies, but there could be. So for the moment, for example, every rover, every probe that is actually been sent, for example, to Mars, has to be sterilized, has to be as clean as they can. So they put the NASA guidelines says it's 300 spores per square meter, for example, which is extremely low. And it's just a way to try and protect that life that you actually have there. So at the moment, we're going from a very, very protective kind of, side standpoint to later on actually saying, oh, you know what, let's just take 200 human beings and send them to Mars. A completely different shift in preparation. And that's something that I had as a, it was troubling me. A few years back, I thought, well, you know what? We need to take care of our planet Earth before we can actually go to Mars. And the problem is, if there's any sort of extraterrestrial life on Mars, we might destroy it. There's a chance that we might come there and we might bring diseases, we might bring whatever it is that we might have on our bodies that could actually damage life on there. The thing is, regardless of what I think, we're going to go to Mars. You're going to have people going there either to drill some elements, to explore, to settle, to colonize. So whatever, we are going there. The question is, how much are we going to go there? Are we going to be able to colonize? So how do you actually prepare? Well, one thing that you have to understand is that obviously Mars is extremely hostile. Like it's just really, really hostile. And the other problem that you have is that it's really far away. So for example, with the moon, communication were delayed by only a few seconds. So you could have a back and forth conversation, except, you know, if you were behind the moon compared to the Earth. But like normally your communication to my Mission Control Center, so to Earth, were quite okay. So if you needed something, if you had a problem, Mission Control Center was actually there to help you. On Mars, the delay can vary between 4 minutes and about 20 minutes, just one way, right? So it means you take 4 minutes to send your message, and then you have to wait another 4 minutes or 20 minutes. So it means 40 minutes if you got the longest point away from the Earth. That means that you can't really ask for help. You can't say, hey, what's that screwdriver? Or what's that thing? So the way that you have to prepare yourself is actually completely different. And the things that you're going to need, the amount of, I don't know, food and habitats and infrastructures that you're going to need will need to be there. Because you can't just, you know, make a phone call to Earth like, oh yeah, DHL, can you send me, you know, a robot extra thing? Doesn't work. You're too far away. It takes months to get there. Even if you were to think beforehand, like say you're 1 month into your trip to Mars and suddenly you think, oh, we won't have enough solar panels because this got damaged. Even if they manage to send a rocket right away, you're still 1 month ahead. On Mars, you're going to have to wait a month for it to arrive, right? So that's the problem, is that you don't have at all the same kind of dependence on Earth. Well, you just can't. So you have to really send some stuff there. The more you can send over there, the more solar panels and robots and habitats and structures, then the more you can try, you know, to make your habitats. So that's the thing. It's very likely that, you know, human beings would arrive on a barren land of Mars. I mean, for one thing, we already have a few rovers on it, so it's not completely empty. But also, we actually would send structures beforehand and try to do stuff. Also, just to see if there's any, you know, kind of damage to those infrastructures, maybe some stuff that we might not have seen before. And if we put those objects for a few years there, we can see, well, actually, this has got damaged in a way that we did not expect, right? And once we've actually started, you know, sending robots, that's when you can send the first humans to Mars, you know. And then what you want to do, well, you want to make Mars more habitable. If you send an astronaut and they can never get out and it's just extremely hard work, obviously you saw on the International Space Station, I mean, like, it's really lovely and it's nice, but obviously you are still confined to a small space. You cannot get outside without a spacesuit. It is still an extreme environment. I mean, astronauts don't get holidays on the International Station per se. They have maybe 1 day off every week or so often, but it's including because it's actually quite a hostile environment. So if you want actually people to go on Mars and you want to colonize it and you want to make it really a civilization, you're going to have to improve the habitat and possibly you're going to have to change Mars into a format. And the other thing that you want to do is improve travel time. I mean, you know, the better technology we have, the better spacecraft you have, the quicker we can get there, then the better. But obviously, we're still limited by the distance and just in general proportion. But there's also the problem of radiation in general. At the moment, the radiation that you would be exposed to during a trip to Mars, one way would be 0.65, the current limitation for astronauts given by NASA and radiation exposure. So I guess you all know when you go to space, you're exposed to quite a lot of radiation. And after some space flight, depending on how long you've been on the International Space Station or if you've been to the moon, which has higher radiation, you're actually not allowed to go anymore because your risk of cancer is too high. So that's the problem. At the moment, if you were to go to Mars, you would go above that threshold right away to go back and forth. Like you will have cancer. It's like almost impossible for you not to get cancer because you just get a too high level of radiation. So at the moment, we need to improve travel time, but we also need to improve radiation shielding. So these are some of the concept arts that you might have. There's like lots of different kind of places that are being thought of and habitats. And speaking of habitats, so this is, for example, the deep space habitat from NASA that has been prepared. There's obviously lots of testing going on at the moment. Like, for example, I really, really like that concept from architects, Alvok and Nilsson from ESA, that was presented 2 weeks ago at the International Astronautical Congress in Paris. Was really, really interesting. And basically that was actually for the moon, it's not for Mars, but the concept is quite similar. It's basically you try to use lava tubes, you just try to use natural rock formation to protect you from radiation. So create just a natural shielding from it. And actually, if you look at this, it's quite cozy and they make a whole town out of it. And this is something that I think compared to mission to International Space Station or things like this, it's something that we can really look forward to. And actually architecture is a big, big topic at the moment for space. You will find many space architects, many space enthusiasts that develop the structure, not only from an engineering standpoint, but also from, you have to think, what do you need? So you are locked up in this habitat, you can't really go outside. What kind of thing are you going to be needing also from a psychological standpoint? Does your room need to be more cozy? Do you need to see things outside? So yeah, habitats are now a big test. It's something that we actually test a lot during Analogue space missions. And they're going to have a functionality and just comfort in general. And obviously you need to be able to build it in not a too long time. Obviously, if it takes you 50 years to build a habitat like this, maybe you won't be so keen in colonizing. Whereas if you can get a habitat that looks more like a home, then you can already think much more in the perspective of going to Mars and actually staying there, not just going back and forth. Now, terraforming. So what's terraforming exactly? So the definition is it's a process by which an astronomical body is engineered by humans to be more Earth-like. Terra, obviously Earth forming, shaping, and therefore more conducive to human colonization. So the problems right now, obviously on Mars, well, there's not exactly the same gravity as we have on Earth. It's not necessarily a massive problem. For the moment, we've experienced mostly microgravity. So we know how the human body reacts to being in microgravity conditions on the International Space Station for a long time. We know it's not fun. We know that the consequences are actually quite large, but we also know that you don't actually die from it, right? Just ways that you can, work against it. And the fact is you don't have microgravity on Mars, you just have a lower gravity than the one that we have on Earth. So it's not too bad. We'll still be able to work out, and we'll have to test basically the medical effects and how it's going to also change things. Like, for example, is your pen going to fly off, or are you going to be able to eat and your food stay on your fork, right? Normally it should, but obviously there will still be some properties that are quite different. The other thing is, at the moment, atmosphere is quite low, so it's not as dense as on Earth, and also the composition. So at the moment, obviously, like, we don't have enough oxygen by far, and we have quite a low temperature, so minus 63 degrees on average. Obviously, I talked about radiation already. There's no magnetic field on Mars. So on Earth, we are protected by both the atmosphere and the magnetic field that we have, but on Mars, we don't. And actually, recently, there were some measurements that showed that the radiation that actually happens during solar flares on Mars is much higher than we thought. So it's going to take quite some time before we can actually, find a solution to this. Some people talk about actually gigantic magnetic magnets that could create this magnetic field. We don't have the exact solution right now, but there's several propositions on how to actually solve this. How to cope with both the composition of the atmosphere and the temperature is actually what we're trying to not do on Earth, which is actually to create climate change by the greenhouse effect. Basically, there's ice on Mars, and this ice is actually frozen CO2. And if you were to heat up those ice caps and release the CO2, you would increase the CO2 level massively. That would heat up the planet. It would still take quite a bit of time. And one way to then make this atmosphere breathable for humans would be to put a lot of plants. Plants obviously use CO2 and they release oxygen. But again, that process still takes quite a bit of time, and you're not guaranteed that your plant is not going to die in the meantime. So it's obviously the whole terraforming process is extremely complicated. There are some solutions, obviously, but like just sending a human being to Mars will be expensive and difficult enough. Actually completely shifting a planet is, it's extremely complicated. One person actually did mention that it would be easier to, tackle climate change on Earth than terraforming. So if we're actually leaving Earth to go to Mars, just because of climate change, we're actually making a terrible calculation, because it would be easier to just, take care of Earth, because Earth is already, something that we've developed to survive on. We haven't developed to survive on Mars. But maybe, you'll see, maybe we'll develop, some skin that actually can withstand radiation or just a cold. We'll find a way. But these are some of the ways that, you could cope with it. Some people did talk about, nuking, for example, the ice caps to release the CO2 amounts and really heat up things. There's several processes. I'll let you have a look into which methods you believe are the best. But what I really believe is just that we're going to learn a lot in the coming years. In the coming years, a lot of technology is going to happen. A lot of the, new missions to the moon and Mars are going to take place. And these will be the key to understanding, will we really be doing some terraforming, or will we just accept the way it is? And will we actually stay on Mars? Now, civilization. So I don't know what you think is civilization. What distinguishes us from animals? Is it that we pay taxes? Is it that we play music and paint and teach just for the sake of it? It's difficult, but I would say that doing things just because we enjoy them is probably a sign of civilization. The day that you can pay somebody to do something because it is beautiful, this is when you've reached civilization. You're not just surviving as part of a group. You're actually enjoying, you're actually living, right? And this is, on the long run, actually one of the aims of, putting man and woman on Mars, is that you can actually just stop surviving and actually live there. But obviously, the first explorers are going to have to be astronauts, often medical or, scientific astronauts. But you're going to have people who need to have a very, very strong mindset, the kind of people who agree that there might not be a return ticket, that there won't be any cozy fire waiting for them. I mean, there'll be a few robots and a few habitats that we've discussed, but it's not going to be cozy right away. So that's going to take years. And once you're actually there, so once those astronauts are already there, can send already some data, can already say, well, this is what we are observing, this is what's happening, then science and medicine have to prove it. Why do I say medicine? Because again, we need to see, what is actually happening to the humans that we send for that long journeys on Mars. Like if those astronauts that went there for the first time and then came back are unwell, we're not going to have people standing there for 10 years. We need to adapt. We need to find a solution. We need to find a solution to this radiation exposure. We need to find a solution to, this lower gravity, or just psychologically. We don't know how we're going to react to seeing Earth so small, so far away from us. It could be, that people will actually psychologically decompensate and not survive it. And this we don't know until we're there. Then once we actually there, once you pass the second step, then we have to start creating those infrastructures. So this is when, you start trying to build bigger habitats, bringing bigger group of people, bringing a wider range of people. And actually then you start implementing regulations. Why do I say regulations? Look at the mess that we have on Earth right now with different countries, different political parties, different religion. We have to adapt. We have to make rules. And it's going to be the same on Mars. It's not because we're on another planet that suddenly everybody's going to be friends. I hope so. I would really, really hope so. But the fact is, you're going to have to regulate some stuff. There's this really wonderful paradox, I think, that is, you're going to either want to take care of Mars and keep it as it is and see how beautiful it is naturally, or you might want to just, use it and exploit its resources and do whatever you want with it. And that's going to be conflicting for people. Some people are going to be on one side, others on the other side. And you have to think, well, I came here, I put my rocket and I started drilling. What are you going to do about it? That's where we have to put regulations, where you have to say, well, this is what we can do or not. And once you've done all this, it's probably when you start completing with art and music and education. Obviously, you could already send people from the beginning who are, artists, musicians, etc. But the problem is, it's always a question of resources. It's always a question of how much does it actually cost for you to send people over there. Do you really want to send somebody who might not be able to perform experiments, who might panic, who might just not have a good time because it's not the way that they are? You could have artists that are extremely resilient. I'm not saying the opposite, but you have to think, what is your training that you have and how can you actually contribute the best? At the moment, access to space is still a privilege, and access to Mars is just going to be top notch for many, many years. So how do you prepare for it in general? Obviously, the longest duration spaceflight we had is like 437.75 days. That was Valery Polyakov quite a few years ago. So that's like long, but that's going to be your trip to Mars, right? Even a bit shorter. So we don't really know much more than this. We know, obviously, it was very complicated. We're developing more and more spacesuits, to try to compensate for microgravity, etc. But it's still very much a research topic. We use analog space missions quite a lot, so big fan of them, obviously. What do we do in them? We test the experiments, we test the food, we test the psychological aspect, we test the habitats, lots of different habitats. Like, for example, a lot of the inflatable habitats in lava tubes can be tested on Earth, in, for example, Hawaii, in Iceland, volcanoes in Italy. So quite some interesting research going on there. There's a whole astrosociology part that is quite important. So if you think about before the missions, for example, to Moon, and even when you go to ISS, from a psychological standpoint, lots of astronauts found it really, really wonderful. And just, you sometimes it was almost depressing to see how small you were. And yet you still had this big planet, and it was still, Earth is still pretty much there. You're going to be on Mars, you barely will see Earth. So how do you react to that? How do you prepare for this? And then, what is a civilization? How do you find it? Who do you send first? What are we going to actually need to just live and enjoy, not just survive? Medicine in general, obviously, we talked about it. And then how do you select and train future Martians? Are we going to accept billionaires to go to Mars? Or, who do you want to send? And how do you want to allocate resources? There's a lot going on right now. So, for example, NASA and ESA, they're looking currently at which astronauts are going to go to the moon. And ESA just started selecting last year, so recruiting the new class of astronauts, and it was very likely that in there would be the future Martians. So it's quite interesting. Have a look at, see who might be in there. But you obviously have to think about how do you train for it. It's a completely different outlook than when you were just, Soviet Union against USA, right? It's not the same space race. It's a much more endurance-like effort. It's much more terrifying, I guess. So the people that you're going to send there are going to be probably very, very different. And you have to think, how do you actually select them and how do you actually train them? Problems, obviously radiation shieldings, we talked about this, but there's also the problem of extracting and using Martian resources. Obviously you're far away, so you can't, call for help, but also you need to think about what other resources that exist. At the moment, there's lots of experiments going on to understand, okay, can we 3D print regolith, which is one of the materials that you find actually on Mars? How can you extract it? How can you, 3D print your habitat like this? How can you make agriculture? So for example, one of my Analogue missions, we actually were filtrating perchlorate from pretend Martian soil and just trying to measure the pH and see, is it going to work on the long run on plants? Because the more you can actually use for Mars, the less you actually have to bring. The more you can use the material, the less you have to depend on other things. And you can also start building a new world, a world where you never had this kind of earth before, or this kind of rock, and start all over again. And that's actually really exciting. But obviously you're going to have to see, does it actually work? Is my material completely wrong? Or is it just that, humans are not fit for the kind of material base there? And the other problem, and I think it's probably one of the biggest one, I think we'll manage to get there and survive, but it's the allocation of resources. Basically, I did mention before that, doing the moon race, once we were on the moon, there was a public interest loss. Nobody was thinking, well, it's actually worth going to the moon, or we need to show who's the strongest person. Why? Because actually there were other problems. Earth has its own problems. You've got poverty, you've got wars, you've got inequality, you've got so much going on that space can seem very distant. Imagine you going to Mars. Yeah, it looks really cool. I mean, you saw the James Webb telescope, everybody's really, really keen, and there's like nice pictures. But imagine it's human beings and it takes you at least 40 minutes to communicate with them and they actually have better stuff to do. Or imagine that maybe people die. Imagine if the first mission to Mars, the astronauts for some reason die. Sorry for the grim thing, but it is a problem. You have to think, will people still think, do we need to explore just for the sake of exploring? Do we really need to be a multiplanetary species? This is something that's going to come up, and a lot of the future of colonization for Mars, at least, I guess, is going to depend on what's going to happen in the next years. And then the other problem will be terraforming. So imagine the first mission is successful, the second mission is successful, but then we realize, no, actually terraforming, we did not see that this is actually even more complicated than we expected. And it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. It might make sense to go even to another planet. Maybe by then, our propulsion system would be great enough that, we think it's worth going. And we find maybe an exoplanet that's actually not that far away from us. Quite unlikely in the next 20 years, but still, you don't know what could happen, what we could be discovering. And that also means we don't know how difficult it's going to actually be. So, timeline. It's a super hard timeline to give. Actually, there's quite little information. Why? Because obviously what happens on Earth actually affects the timeline for space. And like, for example, we thought maybe Mars, we're going to be there 2025. Actually, nope, 2030 earliest. But, maybe somebody's hiding a rocket somewhere. We're going to get there before. I really don't believe so. I believe for the moment, just the radiation protection is just, bad enough that we can't go there safely. It would be a suicide mission. But what's happening right now is, as mentioned, we're selecting astronauts for the moon missions and testing Artemis. So probably lots of you were also expecting to see the rocket launch last month. Did not happen. Again, I said it does affect stuff a bit. But I think we can be quite sure that in the coming 2-3 years, you're going to have the first woman on the moon. That shouldn't be too complicated. And then you can start, putting habitats, testing infrastructures. And during that time, so between, say, 2024 to 2030, there's several things that are going to happen. So there's going to be the Gateway launch. The Gateway is basically this kind of infrastructure that's between the moon and Mars and would help, in storing some more materials and food, and also doing experiments. It's a kind of like in between Earth and Mars that could help in bringing materials. And during that time, we're going to start preparing Mars, and hopefully 2030 is when we're going to have the first mission. And it's quite unsure how it would work if we're going to have, say, for example, you launch the first mission and they're like 3 or 4 months into the trip when the second mission is launched, because obviously they're not going to arrive right away. So they arrive and then the second arrive, and they have an overlap of missions when you have several astronauts from 2 different groups together, and they build more and more. And maybe this is going to be one after the other. These, as said, this success will actually impact the timeline. It could be that you could have like 10 missions in a row, and then suddenly in 2050, we already have civilization. I really believe that with missions that are over 12 months long, it's going to be, especially with so much time that's actually in the traveling time itself, it's going to take quite a bit of time to get there. Doesn't mean that, you might not go to Mars. It just means that for us to actually get to really civilization, to living instead of just surviving, it's going to take quite a bit of effort. I think it's worth it. I think this will be a fantastic human adventure. And I think that even if we don't manage to do this in this century, say we do like we did in the 70s and stop going to the moon for 50 years, we'll pick it up again. it's just human nature to want to go further. It's human nature to want to see more. And the more technology we have, the more we develop, then the more likely it will be easier for us to actually get going with this. So if it's not our generation or our children, there might be, our great grandchildren that actually see this, or our pets if they survive longer than we do. But yeah, this is basically, it's quite interesting to see how much this timeline is at the moment quite fuzzy. It's quite difficult to get an answer. But I bet you that in 2 years or 3 years, things will be already much clearer. As soon as we already have the gateway, it's launched, and we're back on the moon, and we've tested some infrastructures, then okay, we see things are getting concrete. Okay, poof, let's get ready to Mars. Let's send the first mission to Mars. Success, okay, we go for the second, third mission. Not a success, you have to reevaluate the whole thing. So yeah, I'm sorry. I know it's not exact information, but I hope that, we can all sit together in 2 years and see and think, oh, yeah, we can see already the timeline getting much clearer and things really settling in. So my conclusions, let's have a look at the timeline and see what happens. Let's be really patient and be really excited. There's a lot going on in space. So if you build your space fanatics, as I guess you are, because, you're watching this, I hope that, you can contribute to this, have a fantastic time. And yeah, thank you for having me. I hope you have a great space week. Do stay tuned tomorrow, after tomorrow, for all those wonderful talks. I really thank Hex-Star Universe for inviting me for this. I hope you had a great time, and thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for this wonderful presentation. Now I think we can move on to our Q&A session for today. So participants, if you have any questions, you can turn on your mic and directly ask your questions, or you can also write in the chat and I will read out the questions.
Everybody's too shy. So it would be interesting. How many of you would you be keen on going to Mars? Like, if you just put on the chat, like me or like Mars, or if you don't want to go to Mars but you want to go to the moon, just put like moon. I'll be interested in seeing how many people would be liking this. Also, sorry, Tusha, I just saw your message. I didn't see like your message before. So 3 people, that's pretty cool. 4. So, Ravin, to answer your question, why do scientists not focus on improving travel and time before going for colonization? There are. Obviously, there's improvement going on in several aspects of space. There's obviously the habitats themselves, the medicine, the propulsion in general. Like, you can see what's going on with SpaceX, what's going on with NASA, as they're obviously preparing and building bigger rockets. But, science is not always linear. Sometimes your progress is absolutely exponential. And sometimes you either don't have the funds or we just don't have the brains or the technology yet. It's quite difficult to anticipate how things are going to go. Like, that's the problem, is that you could give all the resources you want. Sometimes it's just time. Sometimes the other technologies that help you in finding things. And right now, you also have to develop other sides of space sector. But you can see quite a lot of progress. If you compare to the last 15 years, the attitude has changed so much, I mean, like 15 years ago, we stopped with the space shuttle, and now we're building rockets for the moon and we're building a gateway. So it is improving. It's not that they're not focusing. It's just, it's difficult to anticipate. So if humans would colonize space, how do you think life on Earth would change? I think it really depends a lot on how people would keep in touch. Like, for example, if you transcribe a lot of information, if a lot of people learn from what's happening on Mars, which is something that we do, you learn from extreme environment habitats to actually survive in extreme conditions, then I think we could keep a very strong link. It could be that, for example, if we manage to colonize Mars and have a great life there, that people care even less about Earth. I think that's very unlikely. I think it's going to take us way too much time to make Mars habitable for us to, completely discard the Earth and leave it. I think also what would be quite interesting is to see, if we can have families that are in between two planets. If there's a lot of them, then obviously there will be an inclination to actually keep contact, to really just stay in touch in general. So then questions. So I'm just trying to go through all of them. Space tourism. When do you think will be available at affordable cost? At the moment, so if we talk about space tourism, at the moment, like the small flights that we do, I think in the next 10 years, probably you would be able to go, but for 50,000. But that's the thing, 50,000. To whom is it actually accessible? And also, should we make it massively accessible? Do you want to go there because you want to advance science, or you just want to have fun? It's difficult to know, what is accessible for whom. Obviously, for example, I come from Switzerland, and our salaries are very, very high. If you come from Italy, the salary is already maybe half of what we have in Switzerland, depending on what you do, and the cost would be the same. So that's the problem. It's also a question of, what do you mean by affordable? For whom? Is it for you with, let's say, like a very, very well-paid job, or is it for somebody with a paid job that's a bit different and has 3 kids? Affordable, it will not be a 3 million seats, but it will still be some money. I guess at least the price of several cars or something like that. And I think it's okay, it's like if you go to space, I think you should go there as a scientist or as someone who can bring something back for all, And the only problem is that it shouldn't be only for rich people. It should be for people who are located there because it can actually bring science back. You should be selected on a how much can you bring back basis, not how much money you've got, on a grant system, I think. But that's just my opinion. What policies or laws would you implement on Mars, and what issues would you take into consideration for that planet? So it's a big one. I think there's quite a lot, and at the moment, people are finally waking up because space law is utterly small. At the moment, there's barely any legislations, or they're very, very much obsolete. Like Elon Musk, he can just fire satellites without having to ask anyone's permission. You can be like, yeah, you know what, let's just fire 400 satellites at once, and no. And for Mars, there's nothing. There's no rule that if you put a flag first, it's going to be yours, or how much is going to be yours, how far you can drill. Can you, what can you do? The only thing that we have right now is you can't send nuclear bombs in space. That's the one thing. But, technically you've got satellites working with, nuclear fission reactors. So that's the thing. I think there will be rules about, what happens from international law. I believe the human rights should always be the basis of any law. So you may not, mistreat someone, you may not kill them, may not harm them. You have to treat everyone equally. You have to provide access to food and water to all. If you already can put this basis on Mars, that's already something. So that's the problem. It's some countries, for example, have the death penalty and others don't. Do you believe that's a law that needs to be implemented? And do we think that Mars needs to become one country? Or should it be represented by the countries that go there first? We wanted to do this test during one of my Analogue missions. I wanted to see what would happen if we were cut off from Earth, or, for example, if a war started. Where would we put our allegiance? Do you put it with the people that you are working with, that you with in, the spacecraft, or do you put it with your country? Now, for example, the International Space Station, you can see Earth. You can literally see your country from when you are, and you have Mission Control Center calling you saying, now sabotage the mission. That could, in theory, happen. But when you're on Mars, you don't see Earth. You're not there, and you won't be there for months, so your allegiance to your country is probably going to be actually much lower. And the people you're going to need the most are the people that you are in the spacecraft or in the habitat. So it's very likely that, once you're on Mars, you actually have the formation of new countries, new people who were there first, for example, were there together, and just kind of lost a bit this identity that they have of their own country and form a new identity. And depending on this, that's going to be where you actually have a new set of laws. But again, I think human rights should be the basis of all the laws that are implemented first, and then trying to find a way to protect Mars in the way, you know, like fair allocation of resources, don't damage it too much in the way like you can try to make it fit for terraforming, but try not to lose too much so that if we find any life on it, that we can try to find a way to protect it and understand it before we destroy too much. So I hope that answered your question, Georgiana. I know it's a very broad answer, but it is a very complicated question to answer. What are the present spaceship technologies surviving for Mars apart from Starship? I can't answer you that question like this, sadly. It's not my main domain, so sorry about that. Hi, Pablo. Nice to see you. Can scientists make space station in space? So I guess you mean, can we build a space station from space? I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't think I understand the question. Why do not all space organizations collaborate with each other for Mars colonization? So I wish we did. I'm very much for space collaboration. I think that would be fantastic. The problem is, if you look at the privatization, like commercial spaceflight, what's happening is that you have more money coming in, you have more technology development, so that's really, really good. But also you think, well, we need to make money. How do you make money? You have exclusivity, right? Obviously there's lots of collaboration happening between organizations, but not all of them do. Why? Because they need this money income. They need to be competitive. On the long run, it would be great if we could have less competition, more collaboration. But, you know, go tell SpaceX, Virgin Galactic, and, you know, Blue Origin to work all together, to do the launch themselves. They probably will say no. However, you will have, for example, SpaceX working with NASA, who will work with, say, a satellite packaging thing, and they will do something together. Why? Because they produce different kinds of space technologies. So yeah, if you have NASA only working or ESA only working, you have massive collaboration. But as soon as you get into commercial space flights, you need this competitive edge, and you need this different people competing to change prices and make technological advancements. This is sadly how you usually make progress. Should humans colonize space? That's a big question. Are we worthy of colonizing space? For example, if we look at the way that we're destroying our planet, do we actually deserve to be on others? But at the same time, what is our existence? What are we except people who want to reproduce and exist and survive? And where is our survival? Is our survival going to be on Earth? Or is it only going to happen if we manage to go on other planets? And as sentient beings, as intelligent beings, is it maybe our duty to go and explore the rest of the universe? It's more a philosophical question than a scientific question, and everybody can answer it differently. There's no wrong or right answer. You know, it's a complicated thing. But you can maybe let me know your opinion on this. You know, you could say, do not go outside of Earth simply because we need to take care of Earth and we were already lucky to survive there. Or you can think, well, we evolved to survive on Earth, we evolved to be intelligent, so we deserve to go on other planets. Either way is in a way correct, but either way might not be respected. You know, it's up to us what we want to try to do. Whether it's morally okay or not is going to be a question probably for thousands of years ahead of us. So how does the age factor affect space travel? So I guess, I mean, what age you will be when you travel. Obviously, when you're very young, you're much more prone, you know, to like cancer due to radiation, so it's safer to go later on. The other thing that you have, like for example, if you look at women, because we already have eggs, as we call them, don't like that word in English, but it's the word for it. The problem is that when we go to space, we actually do suffer quite a lot of radiation. So if you go once you already had your kids, it's actually less problematic than if you go when you're younger and you might still want to have kids, because that's when your eggs get radiation, and you could potentially have anomalies with your babies. So that's one of the advantages of being a bit older. And also usually a bit, more stable with your life. You don't have to deal with studies and, maybe younger brothers and sisters, and a bit more where you're going. So sometimes being a bit older is an advantage. But obviously when you're younger, usually you have a bit more energy. So maybe you'd be able to carry, heavier loads, having really, really intense schedule, etc. The other thing you could think of, and I do know a few astronauts, for example, who they're old enough that their partners passed away, their kids are old enough, and they don't have anything to lose by leaving Earth. They're just going to the next big adventure, So that's also another thing. If you're very, very young, you have a lot of family here, you might not want to leave. Whereas once you're actually a bit older, maybe, you don't have much family left, or you've just seen it all, and the next step is just dying or going to Mars. Why not go to Mars, right? It's an adventure on its own. Which planet or moon would be easiest to terraform? Well, at the moment, Mars is obviously the one that's being selected. It's a bit better than, the moon. We'll see. I mean, it's a bit further off, but it's got like more material that could be actually interesting. And exoplanets, we don't know yet. Obviously, we know that some of them seem to have really promising conditions, but these are only observations, from our telescopes and stuff like this. We haven't had any probes there, so it's difficult to have the whole picture. And the other thing is just too far. I mean, if we already have a problem traveling just to Mars, then going all the way to an exoplanet currently just doesn't make sense. So yes, at the moment, it doesn't make any sense to just go anywhere but Mars. Well, time dilation act when visiting Mars. Yeah, in a way. I mean, it always has an effect. Even when our satellites, our clocks, they already have a small difference in time than we do. So we have to actually account for this. So yes, it does. Would you actually notice it? I don't believe so, but I haven't made a calculation. So I don't want to be answering wrong. According to Elon, if we nuke Mars, then if it can be habitable. Yes, so that was what I was talking about before. So basically, it's just a frozen CO2 caps that you could, just if you nuke them, you create lots of heat, and then you release the CO2 in gaseous form, and then this creates basically the greenhouse effect, and you could actually, speed things up if you were to nuke them. Is it a good idea? That's more the question, and would it really, really work? I mean, in theory, it could. Would it work in real life? I don't know. Can we colonize Europa, Jupiter, Moon? Maybe. It's again the same question. If we can't colonize Mars, then possibly we can colonize Europa. It's a question of how much of our technology we develop. I do not know all the properties of Europa like this on top of my head, but technically, yeah, you could try in the long run. I mean, I guess 100 years ago, just telling someone that you could fly with an airplane or, go to the moon seemed crazy. So why not Europe in a few years once we develop the technology? I'm going to check how many of you said yes about Mars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Only 6 people who want to go to Mars. So this is great. Hopefully see you there. But yeah, I see you don't have any more questions. So I guess it's the end for me. Don't want to hold you guys up too much. But yeah, it was really lovely. I hope that you learned a bit and didn't go too in depth for you, but hopefully it was still useful information to all of you. And I hope you have a wonderful space week.
Thank you for this wonderful presentation and taking your time to help our participants and answering their questions. We're really grateful to have you with us today for celebrating the World Space Week. And I'm sure our participants are also really greatly helped after this session. And also, we are really thankful to all our participants for making this session a successful one and asking different questions and letting everyone know different informations. So lastly, before ending this session, I would like to request everyone to turn on their camera once so that we can take a picture for our memory purpose.
Thanks for your comments, everyone. Yeah, you can contact me on LinkedIn. At the moment, I'm quite busy, so try not to contact me too much or make clear questions. But happy to answer to you guys when I have some time. So just put my name in LinkedIn, you'll find me. Thanks for the comments.
I think we have taken a pictures. So with that, we can end our session here for today. And also tomorrow we have another session on space robotics with Shatra. So don't forget to join the session and know more about space robotics. We'll be also live streaming the session on YouTube. So don't forget to comment on our YouTube comment section. And also don't forget to post on social media and celebrate World Space Week with us. And let us know how much you like the session or how can we get better at organizing these sessions and how much you have learned from these sessions. Thank you, everyone. I think with that we can end our session here for today.
Thank you for the session.
Take care, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you for this class, ma'am.
It was our pleasure, ma'am, to have you.